Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's Fireside Creator. I am Reverend Dr. Sherry Palace, and welcome. I'm so glad you're here. This week's show is on leaving my religion and finding myself, and we have an absolute amazing panel to discuss this. If you are watching on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe. If you are on Facebook, register with StreamYard so I can see your name when you comment or have a question. Otherwise, you will be Facebook anonymous. Please keep all comments and questions related to the show topic. And remember, this is a safe space. I want to give a shout out to the sponsors Ruth, Amanda, Michelle, and Kirsten. You guys rock. I also want to thank you because I wouldn't be doing this show if you guys weren't watching each week, and you afford me these types of conversations, which I just absolutely love. If you enjoy the show, please consider supporting it. You can go to sherrypalace.com and use the support tab. There are several options and levels of membership for as low as $3 a month, and if you can support my work. Okay, enough housekeeping. Tonight's show is on leaving my religion and finding myself. Let's meet our panel. First, we have Dr. Chrissy Stroup. She is an ex-evangelical writer, co-editor of Empty the Pews, Stories of Leaving the Church. She has a doctorate in modern Russian history from Stanford University. After several years of teaching at the college level in Moscow, Russia, and Tampa, Florida, she became a full-time freelance writer. Chrissy came out as a trans woman in 2019 and moved to Portland, Oregon. Her work has appeared in Foreign Policy, the Boston Globe, Playboy, Religion Dispatches, Dame Magazine, and other outlets. Welcome, Chrissy.
Hi, thanks, Sherry.
Thanks for coming back. I'm glad to have you here.
Oh, happy to.
Next, we have Ilad Nohari. He is an ex-Hasidic and an ex-orthodox Jew. Can't talk all of a sudden. He is a former leader of a community of creative Jews in Brooklyn called Henriva. I'm probably not pronouncing this right. I'm so sorry, Ilad. And a writer in places like the Daily Beast and the Guardian. Today, he lives with his family in Long Beach, California, as he rebuilds his life after leaving behind the Hasidic community he joined 13 years ago. Welcome, Ilad. How are you?
Good. How are you? Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming on. I can't wait to talk to you. And last but definitely not least, we have Torah Bontrager. She was born a traditional Amish, grew up with no electricity, and speaks English as a second language. Her memoir is Amish Girl in Manhattan, and seemingly she's the first Amish escapee to graduate from an Ivy League school, Columbia University. Torah founded the Amish Heritage Foundation to empower women through education. Their goals are to make education a federal right and overturn Wisconsin versus Yoder, the SCOTUS case that allows religion to dictate a child's education. She has been featured on MTV and NPR, among others. Welcome, Torah.
Hi, so nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you all so much for coming. I definitely want to get into everybody's stories. And basically, I want to start off the chat tonight as to what was the impetus. For me, personally, it was finding out that the world wasn't 6,000 years old and Adam and Eve weren't the first inhabitants. That blew everything open for me, and the cognitive dissonance set in, and everything started imploding from there. What happened with you, Chrissy?
That was definitely a part of it because, for me, it was a very long process, and I was a very cerebral kid, which I think at the end of the day, I realized that this came from never feeling quite right in my own body and my own skin. I always just sort of felt off and different. And so it seemed like everyone else was just kind of living in life like it was their natural habitat. And somehow I just never seemed to feel like I fit in that way. I didn't put my finger on what that was when I was a kid. I didn't even have the ability to acknowledge to myself that I was transgender until I was 33. But, I think that as a kid, this made me just really someone who lived in their head a lot. So I was looking at Christianity from the time that I really started to have serious doubts. I can look back at a couple things in middle school years that definitely made me hesitate. I got to go to public school for half of 6th grade and then learned about evolution, and that was one thing. Another was the extreme purity culture, that I got in 7th grade at Colorado Springs Christian School, when we were told basically, anything that you might do with a boyfriend or girlfriend is you shouldn't do anything you wouldn't do with somebody else's spouse, because that would be cheating on your and their future spouse if you don't marry them. With a lot of fear mongering about disease as well. And then we were kind of all strongly encouraged to sign purity pledges, and it seemed like, who knows what would happen if you didn't sign them. So everybody signed them. I thought the whole thing was very manipulative, and it rubbed me the wrong way. But, it took me a long time.
Controlling too.
To really, it's an extremely controlling thing to do. But it took me a long time to really fully embrace, science and evolution. That was even still in college when I did that. And as for the other stuff, I didn't really start doubting a lot again until I think age 16, when I read the entire Bible through for the first time and seemed to see a lot of contradictions and violence and things I didn't like. And we were supposed to take it all literally and believe that it had no errors in it. So for me, I processed all of this as like something that I thought was a purely intellectual thing for a couple decades. Then I was like, oh, but the reason I had to do that is that I'm queer. Okay, it's like a light bulb.
So is that why you think you left religion, is because you are trans? Was that it?
I think it's a big part of it, just looking back at it, even though it couldn't be recognized or acknowledged during the time of my processing and deconstruction until very late in that game. One thing that's interesting and really telling for me is that, many years, 10, 15 years or so after I stopped believing in hell, I would still sometimes have that visceral fear of hell as a place of eternal conscious torment. So I didn't believe in it intellectually, but the fear would come back. And as soon as I just, recognized for myself that I am a queer person, that fear of hell just dissipated. It was like that whole decades-long intellectual struggle was really just sort of superstructure on something else that was going on underneath that I had to figure out how to resolve.
I still, after all of these years, because I've been deconstructing for about 25 years now, and I still, if the streets are all empty, I get a kind of freaked out, like, okay, did the apocalypse happen? The whole, everybody, it's just a tinge now. But
I've been left behind. Yeah,
left behind. Oh my God, I had it all the threats, all the fear, everything. What about you, Torah?
Okay, before I answer that, I think I should leave the studio and come back on, because I think there's something wrong with my audio, and hopefully that will fix it, because right now I'm hearing like 2 feeds that are a little bit delayed. And
and that wasn't
sounds
before
like
we were in the back room.
It wasn't in the back room. It just started happening when we went live.
And is it me, or is it Chrissy, or is it everybody?
It's everybody. I can even hear myself talking.
I'm hearing that delay now too. I wasn't before.
How odd.
Background.
Let me try and do this real quick. Let me see. Now talk. How's that? Is that any better? No? Can you hear me at all?
I can hear you.
Okay. Is it still echoing? Technical problems, man. They kill me on the live show all the time.
So testing, 1 2 1 2 1.
You sound great on my end. Audience, how does everybody sound? Is it just us? Arturo, Kirsten, Michelle, anybody? There's a bit of a delay for them too, so we have to wait. Gotta love the live shows. Gotta love them. Okay. Do you want to sign off and go and come back in?
I think I should leave the studio and connect again and just see if that fixes it.
Okay, go ahead and do that. And Ilad, if you want to go ahead and do the same thing, Chrissy and I can just shoot the shit.
I think I'm okay. I don't know. I heard like a little quiet thing behind, but I think
okay. Well, then let's go. Like, tell me what you was the impetus for you leaving? Was there one thing? Was it a bunch of things?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I had like a, I'm always so fascinated hearing from experiences from people from other religions and other backgrounds, partly because there's so much in common and also because there's so much different. I actually didn't grow up religious. I grew up secular. My parents are Israeli, Jewish. And I, like a lot of people in college, I was looking for meaning for a lot of reasons. I was feeling quite alone, and I was always like a spiritual person, and I still very much am very spiritual. But I always felt kind of alone and not seen in that sense, and I felt misunderstood in a lot of ways. Like I was always like interested in death and what happens after you die and existence. These questions, to me, it was like as much as science was answering so many interesting questions, this never seemed to be something that could be understood. So I was fascinated by this, and I got connected to a Hasidic. There's a Hasidic group. Hasidim are generally known for being insular, but there is a group called Chabad, which essentially missionizes to other Jews. And I was recruited in college. I had a powerful experience there. I went and very quickly afterwards went to study in Israel, then came back, got married very quickly, went back to Israel, studied some more. And these are kind of like, it's called a yeshiva. It's basically like a seminary where you learn kind of disconnected from the world a bit. And the idea is to kind of like absorb all the information you missed as you were growing up and all these things. And after that, I ended up moving to a neighborhood called Crown Heights, which is where Chabad Hasidim are located, or I should say their headquarters is located. They're actually all over the world. And, at the time, I was very much like a fresh recruit. I was super passionate, super vocal. I was like many early stage, they're called Bali Tshuva. It's someone who's like been recruited recently to join an Orthodox community. I was also passionate about fighting against ex-Orthodox people. I was very kind of, and by fighting, I mean I was a writer, and I kind of got my start in the community. And it's interesting because you can get kind of a boost by living in such a niche community and also having the Asher, I'm seeing his comments.
Yeah.
He's an incredible activist. I could go on and on about him, but yeah. So I really got very integrated in the culture, very excited about it. I kind of became, for lack of a better word, kind of known in the community because of this kind of stuff. And my blog was growing quite quickly. And as I did that, I started to connect with a lot of, I was always consider myself a creative. My wife is a painter, I'm a writer, and we love creative people. And I had always had this philosophy about creativity that it's meant to be something where it's extremely individualized, and it's meant to be something where you're bringing out whatever is underneath out, as opposed to like, what I considered to be propaganda, which is, taking whatever is outside and putting it in and then expressing it that way, right? So I really believed in that approach, and so I actually started a publication kind of inspired by my blog, where it was a lot of personal essays. And at a certain point, we started getting submissions from people who had been abused. And at the time, I was kind of an apologist around abuse that was kind of an epidemic in the community, because, I was like, a lot of the same arguments I'm sure you've heard in your communities is like, abuse happens everywhere. It's normal, people are, going after us specifically, and a little bit more specific to our community, it's anti-Semitic, to focus on it too much, that kind of thing. And as we started to publish these, number one, I noticed very quickly that no one else was publishing these pieces in the Orthodox world for the most part. Or if they were, it was very, very fringe. And we had grown semi-popular at that point, and so our pieces going up there, number one, was revelation for some people in the sense that these stories were suddenly being told in very popular forums. And then it also very quickly led to backlash. That combined with the fact that as soon as people saw that we were publishing this, and because it didn't exist anywhere, we started getting a flood of stories about abuse. And at that point, I started to understand, I started to it started to get through my head that I wasn't dealing with something that was personal and specific. I mean, it was that, of course, but it was also systemic. And these kinds of questions dogged me for a while. I became an activist trying to deal with the things. And like a lot of people, I tried to be a change maker from within because, very often, the people that want to make change tend to get a certain message drilled into their head, which is the only way to make change is from within. In my opinion, this is one of many messages that are kind of tailored to keep people in and also to stop change.
And keep it quiet.
Yes, and it's very interesting because since I left, I've been learning quite a lot about how this operates in other communities, and absolutely fascinating how widespread it is. So is that kind of combined with my own spiritual growth and changes, which also led to a lot of backlash because I started to live a little bit differently than other people. I started to be more vocal about issues like queer rights and that kind of thing. And again, and most of all, I think seeing backlash to every single one of these things to me taught me that the biggest sin you can make in insular communities and communities that are toxic or unhealthy is to speak up and to speak up publicly. This is like the cardinal sin in my mind, as far as I've seen, and I'm obviously not the only person that thinks that. All of this kind of built to a point where it really became, we were building an in-person community along with our online one. And as much as we loved all the people and we cared so much about them, at a certain point it was untenable. We couldn't keep living like this. And also my wife and I kind of, one day, I just kind of remember having one day where we looked at each other and like, this is not how change happens, and we're out, like, because we're sick of playing this game. We're sick of playing by the rules of other people that they've imposed on us. Even by being change makers from within, I felt like we were playing the game that they wanted us to play. And I was done with that. So that's a very long, but actually abridged version of the story.
Yeah, I have always had this rebellious streak. So when someone tells me to sit down and shut up, it just makes me scream a little bit louder. Torah, what's your story?
All right. So I missed out on Chrissy's and the beginning of Ilad, so I'll catch up with that when I watch the replay. But mine started, so I was born and raised traditional Amish in the United States, and that meant that I was not allowed to ever leave the religion, thanks to the 1972 U.S. Supreme Court case, Wisconsin versus Yoder, that says if you're born an Amish child, your future, the only future for you, is to be a housewife or a farmer. And of course, it's gendered, male. If you're male, you're going to be a farmer. And if you're female, you're going to be a housewife inside the Amish church. And so that meant, among other things, that I got an 8th grade only education. I went to an Amish only school, and with Amish only students and teachers who themselves did not go beyond the Amish 8th grade. And I asked a lot of questions from a very young age. So I was just born differently, is what I tell everybody. I
feel you.
And, one of my nicknames was Question Box, and everybody thought I was cute when I asked all these, precocious questions when I was a little kid running around. But then as I got older, closer towards adolescence, that was now seen as a sign of rebellion and not being submissive. And as a female, someone, assigned female at birth, you are, absolutely a second-class citizen. You're inferior to the males. Like, that is not even negotiable. And so, I didn't get answers that were satisfactory, in terms of, for example, why can't we drive a car? Why is it okay for us to hire someone who's not Amish, pay them to drive us around, but we can't have a car ourselves? And, so there were varying answers that were given to that, but there was this one Bible verse that was cited as, that's the verse that says we shouldn't have cars. So when I was 11,
I gotta know, what is it?
I would have to go back into the, which says a lot about how far I've come, because I now can't, cite very many
Good
verses
for
or
you.
citations. And yeah, I can still find it. I know I'll know where it is. I'm not sure where, but I could find it, in a few hours maybe.
Only if you're up to it.
Right. But I read the Bible from, front to back, cover to cover, when I was 11 years old, because one of the, stock answers is wait until you're older and then you'll understand.
Yeah.
And that still didn't answer my question. I became, in my mind at 11 years old, I felt that it was not ethical for me to remain a practicing Amish person, that I needed to leave the religion, or I would be the hypocrite that Jesus talked about, that the Pharisees or whoever were hypocrites, and I will just say, insert here, I'm not, religious at all. And I question whether Jesus even existed, and Moses and whoever. So if I'm talking about the Bible, it's just to put it in context of my experience.
Understood.
And so
we have a lot of atheists that watch this show. You're in company.
Yeah, and I just want everybody to know, I'm not secretly religious anymore.
Me either.
So yeah, I felt I had like this very Buddhistic interpretation of that specific verse, and I felt, what Jesus was saying is just don't be attached to material possessions. And it was this verse, something about store up treasures in heaven and not on earth, that verse. And so, yeah, so I felt, Jesus would be on my side and, would, go to bat for me if I escaped. Wasn't so sure about God, though, because he pretty much seemed like, the tyrannical bishops and fathers and male
Jesus,
figures.
take the wheel.
But long story short, I escaped at age 15, and that was my second escape attempt. I had an earlier failed first attempt 9 months before that. So even at 15, like,
what do you mean failed? Were you caught, or
I was caught? Yeah, I was caught. I was put under what I call Amish house arrest, which meant I was never left alone without adult supervision.
Oh, wow.
And so, long story short, and there's also a little like twist to it, which is I had made my escape plans. My second escape plans were going to be foolproof. I was not going to tell anybody. Like, I made the mistake of calling one of the non-Amish taxi drivers to pick me up and take me to the Greyhound bus station the next morning, and she couldn't do it. It was too late at night. And the good person that she was concerned came driving in at 10 o'clock at night, wondering if Torah got a ride to the bus station the next morning. So my next escape plan was not going to involve anyone. I was just going to take the car ferry from Michigan to Wisconsin, was going to bike the whatever 9-10 miles or forget what it was at night and catch the car ferry. And of course, 2 weeks before car ferry season started that year, my parents decide we're going to move to a different location, a completely new geography. And that's a classic move, for families who have troubled teens. Let's move, and that will fix everything instead of, dealing with with the root problems. And so, yeah, I didn't know how I was going to get out of there. I didn't know where the closest train station was and all of that. But the one good thing was that I was allowed to go to the Amish bakery, work in the Amish bakery unsupervised to and from again. And that's where they made the mistake, because I figured out the Amish schoolhouse has a phone, which was on the way home, and I could go in there and make collect calls. And so I
love the methodical nature of this 15-year-old. You had your shit down.
I also, within that time, in that sometime the year leading up to it, figured out that I could become emancipated as a minor. So that was the big, huge kind of issue, was if I escape, how can I, keep my parents or whoever, the police, from forcing me to go back. And of course, I had no idea that I had rights as a 15-year-old, depending on what the state is. And of course, lots of those rights for teens has evolved a lot over the 25 years since I left. But even still, in the state of Michigan at that time, you could become emancipated as a 16-year-old. And some of the grounds for that were, parental guardian abuse. And another one was educational deprivation. And there was a front page story in the local paper that featured this boy who was 16 and was emancipated. So I'm guessing it was a fairly new thing for the state at that time, because it made the front page of our little local newspaper, which I read while my mother was asleep because I got beaten if she caught me reading it. And it was the only way I could figure out, what was going on in the outside world. And I mean, talk about, this is your prep. It's not like, okay, you're reading the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Newsweek, Religion Dispatches, the Guardian. Like, no, we don't have that. All I have is this dinky little, small time newspaper. And I think that's the world. So I knew that was how I could go to school. Like, I could escape. I would be, would not be forced back before I was 18, so I could go to high school. That was my big dream, was to go to high school. And if I waited until I was 18, that would be too late. Like, I wanted the normal kind of, experience as everyone else. And that's sort of like the short version of my long story.
Like I said, an hour is not going to be enough. I think it's interesting. In fact, I just realized something as you were speaking, because at 12, I started trying to escape. Like, we were on vacation in the Sequoia National Forest. I was 12, and I was sure that I could just live on my own. And other times, 6 months later or so, I ran away to Chuck E. Cheese. I mean, I had these plans, no one would find me behind the mouse, but it was just get me out of these toxic situations, these control. I was going to a Christian school myself, so it was school, church, home, all constant indoctrination, and it was just get me out of here. I've got to escape. And Chrissy, I bet you felt like that too, because of your own skin and not being comfortable in it.
I mean, I have a lot of mixed feelings, and there are parts of my childhood that were happy. I didn't experience the worst kinds of abuse by any stretch. Yeah, manipulation, indoctrination, controlling, occasionally spank with a wooden spoon, but nothing worse than a wooden spoon.
We had a paddle.
There was paddling in my Christian schools, but I never got paddled. See, because I was too much of a goody two-shoes, always trying to please the adults. I mean, I got a lot of pleasure and validation out of just being that smart kid, teacher's pet, adult pleaser. I actually became sort of a reluctant rebel, but I was processing a lot of stuff underneath the surface. And, especially from about age 16 on, I couldn't let it go. And eventually I would say that I did make sort of attempts to escape from evangelical subculture. I studied abroad when I was in college in Germany and England. And I went and taught English in Russia for a year between college and grad school. I enrolled in a secular, postgraduate program at Stanford University and graduated with a PhD. I intellectualized everything, and I was thinking that this kind of education was going to be my path to getting it all figured out, which it wasn't. And it wasn't because it's there was more going on that I had to figure out about myself and had to figure out how to figure that out. I mean, fortunately, I was able to get some therapy when I was in graduate school. But yeah, I kept moving on from place to place, and I got very uncomfortable too with like living constantly in liminal space and in some kind of transition in my life between, this childhood conservative Christianity and what am I going to be now? I tried being Episcopalian for a little bit. And there were a lot of the baggage came up in things like I got married and divorced in the middle of grad school. And I was trying to, in a very unhealthy way, save myself by saving the person that I married from a toxic situation that she was stuck in, as an au pair, being, heavily exploited, just in a pretty abusive situation. Um, Someone from the former Soviet Union, I thought, oh, we both speak Russian. We'll get along fine. And but I still wanted to get married young and have kids and do all the things. And I was trying to please my family and my parents and not be a traitor to them for not believing the same things. Um, and I just really deeply internalized that, okay, that's going to make me happy. So I started looking to like secular things like marriage and family for quote unquote salvation. And it was very stupid. You can't plan out your life like that. And it's wrong to use people as means to ends. And yeah, but I mean, I felt all this internalized pressure because all of my cousins, my sister, they were getting married and having kids. And I just didn't know, but I kept, I moved to Russia after finishing college in Indiana, and to California. After grad school, I taught at a Russian university for 3 years, then Tampa, Florida. And I think that by trying to get those foreign experiences, I was looking for ways to compare my American and my specifically evangelical American experience. And that started in high school, because I got to go on a trip to Germany and a few other European countries with the high school German teacher. She arranged homestays for us. And so, yeah, I mean, the kind of Christian schools I went to, they had some quality programs. They also had very intense indoctrination. So I don't support this model of education. You get a whole lot of cognitive dissonance out of going to a Christian school that has,
huge.
AP classes, and is also still trying to insist that you have to believe in young earth creationism and flood geology, and you have to always vote for Republicans because liberals are killing babies and everything else. I mean, a bunch of people believing that, this is going to date me, but in middle school, all these rumors of Bill Clinton being the Antichrist. And, then I was already in grad school when Obama became president, but then it was, Obama's
and the Antichrist.
Yeah, and a secret Muslim.
Yeah.
And a communist, because you can be all those things.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I was always sort of running from something, looking for something. And I thought that I was going to find the answers through a purely intellectual path. And I was very sort of disembodied person in many ways, bad with space, have a terrible sense of direction. I like words, and I lived in my head. And when I started to come down from that, then I learned a lot more about myself and why I could never reconcile myself to the environments I was in. But did I try to escape? Yeah, but in a very slow, passive-aggressive way. And maybe that's because I wasn't in the same kind of prison that Torah was. I had access to information. I was, as I said, I wasn't really beaten per se. Spanked with a wooden spoon is bad. It's abusive. Okay, don't do that. But, it's not a belt. It's not, just being smacked upside the head or whatever.
I got spanked every day in class from 3rd to 5th grade for talking too much. Go figure.
And that's clearly a very gendered thing to do. I bet no boys got spanked for talking too much.
Yeah, I bet. Ilad, you sounded like you were actually looking for something, so there was nothing to escape from. Do you feel that you needed to escape in any way? I mean, I know you got a lot of pressure, but...
Yeah, I mean, escape is an interesting term. I think when I look at, kind of the progression, I think for me, I had a lot of kind of, what's the word, like internal, I needed to, and I'm sure, I'm preaching to the choir. It's an interesting term to use, but I'm preaching to the choir. But yeah, like in the sense that I had my own body was trying to escape from itself, if that makes sense. The first time I started to it was almost like clockwork. Every year I would have kind of like a freak out, and like big doubts that kind of came to the surface, and I would have like panic attacks. Sometimes I would get sick. I remember one time in particular, this was when I started to move away from being Hasidic to being modern Orthodox. I literally had, I remember I was like, I remember I have a very distinct memory of being on the subway, where I would write on the subway, so being on the subway and like trying to push down thoughts about evolution, because it was like, I tried to approach it, with different answers from the Hasidic Rebbe that I followed, and it never satisfied me. So I think my body was like literally rebelling against itself, and I think that move was like a beginning step towards later movement. But there was that, and then there was actually, I think once it fully hit me that, kind of how I described, that I was, the way I kind of describe it is like I was, if you're in a casino, the house always wins. So like the way I think I just kind of realized the only way to win is to walk out of the casino. So for me, I happened to be in this position where, I had my job was going well, things were going well there, and they had been offering, or actually more asking me to come move to California from New York. And I had told them, like, I was in my head, I was convinced that this community that I had been building, this like creative out of the box, like place that I wanted to build, that was kind of meant to be an alternative from within and all these things. I was committed in my mind to doing this for the rest of my life. I really had decided this, and I'd sacrificed a lot. By the time I left, we were broke. We were like living in a very difficult situation. I had been kind of ostracized from being able to be hired in any Jewish, even mainstream Jewish places, because I was considered like very controversial. If you want to be like in a big tent organization, you have to be able to work with Hasidic Jews, for example. And I had kind of switched my career to that. Anyway, so point being, I was like, going through a lot of crazy stuff at that time. And again, kind of sick. And I think, we had that talk with my wife, and I think for us, moving to California was a thing that I think even a few months before that felt unimaginable. But because we had gone through all this crazy crap, it was kind of like we got beat down a bit, and maybe in a good way, that it kind of forced us to rethink the way we were doing things. And I think my wife was ready to go way before I was. I think I remember kind of saying this, and she was like, "Yeah, I've been telling you that," kind of. I think that was the escape I got. And then I feel like I'm going through that right now. In a lot of ways, I'm still processing. It's like in my bio, I'm like, I feel like I'm in the early stages of it. I only left, I left the community physically a year ago, which for us was a really big deal, to move across the country and all these things, and to not know anyone during a pandemic and blah, blah, blah. Amazingly, in such a place, I felt much healthier, of course, but which you wouldn't expect to move in the middle of a pandemic and not know anyone. But
so this is really fresh for you.
Yeah, and I've only started really examining. I think for me, it's both fresh and not, because I was such a rebel in the community itself. So I've gone through a lot of the stages others can go through like after they've left, and because I was like a voice and blah blah, like I was controversial, so I dealt with a lot of the toxic community elements I dealt with earlier, I think, than others. But yes, I think realizing the depths to which this was endemic to the community and to other communities, and how much it had in common with other communities, is relatively new. I basically tried not to think about it for really for the first 8 months or first 6 months, and then I started to research about high control groups, that kind of thing, and that really opened my eyes a lot. So that's why I've been you mentioned that my social media was all shut down, and now I'm kind of still processing it. And so every now and then I pop up, I message Chrissy, and thank God I got connected to this. It's really beautiful. But generally I'm like kind of on the down low still, for the most part. I wrote one.
That's a part of it. I think that is a part of it, is to try and find it, and find yourself, find your beliefs.
Yes, absolutely. I used to write. I used to publish an article once a week, and I published one in the last year, and I'm very happy that that's the case. Which is the first time in my life I ever would have thought that about writing. So, but yeah, I'm going through the healing process. But I feel like this kind of stuff is part of it, and I'm really grateful.
Good. I'm so glad that you're here with us. Starting with Chrissy, is there anything you miss? For me, I'll start with me. For me, and I know that Twitter might, my Twitter people are going to be like, no, I miss the praise and worship. I miss this. I mean, being an evangelical, Sunday mornings were a rock concert, and it didn't matter how I felt. I was rocking out. The music was great. That was the main reason I was there. I know a lot of people incur trauma over that and still have, go more songs. But for me, I love to dance. I have the energy. I love the music. We had a lead guitar. My ex-husband was a drummer. We had the full band. It was awesome. That's about the only thing I miss. What about you, Chrissy?
Don't
judge me, by the way.
No, I'm not. My dad is a music pastor.
There you
go. Sometimes I would get a kind of spiritual high from worship. I also, you're kind of expected to volunteer and do stuff with the church when your parents are in ministry. So I learned how to run the old analog light boards back in the day to do the lighting for the church's rock concert vibe. And I would sometimes sing or do a drama or something like that in church. And I don't miss that per se, I guess, but I don't really hate it looking back at it either. I mean, I do hate the manipulative aspects of it, I guess.
Oh, definitely.
Because it's there really is so much of that. But yeah, I mean, my dad's a cool guy, and he himself has deconstructed some stuff, and he's now a fan of Richard Rohr and Peter Rollins and those guys, and Rob Bell, mysticism, and he kind of got pushed out of his last job at an evangelical church in those ways that so often happens, where the pastor turns on you and tries to force you into an uncomfortable position. They wanted him to go down to halftime and put his younger assistant in charge, who has far fewer skills and far less relevant knowledge than him. And it was probably in part because Dad was known to be too liberal for that church at that point. But luckily, he was able to get help from a friend who used to be a professional recruiter, do a really serious job search, and he ended up in an ELCA Lutheran church.
Oh, okay.
Those are the good Lutherans there. and that church is LGBTQ affirming, which my dad is too, and now he has,
That's
there's
awesome.
no reason he can't be public about it. I do kind of miss just the kind of feeling of unproblematized singing with family. A lot of times we would sing religious songs, or also patriotic songs around and they were kind of the same thing, to be honest. To have that early childhood naivete about those things, but obviously nostalgia for that is maybe sort of inevitable, but also misplaced. I mean, you can't go back to that, and you can't preserve that, and it wouldn't be a good thing if you did, because there's a lot wrong with it. But you could only see that later. So we're a very musical family, and yeah, I did really enjoy a lot of family singing time and that sort of thing. Like in that Johnny Cash song, Daddy Sang Bass, from his gospel album, about how the circle won't be broken, we'll be singing together up in the sky. Yeah, sort of a beautiful idea, I guess, if you like your family, which which I mostly did as a kid. And I still have a pretty good relationship with my parents after some rough years. Some family members not so much. Maybe I miss certain friendships, and I'm just sorry that certain people didn't go the same way I did and are still quite extreme. Certain teachers and people from the school I still have great affection for. English teachers tend to always be the kind of subversive ones, even if they don't exactly mean to be. So, I mean, I know one of my English teachers who was really smart, literally believed that rock music is satanic because of
Oh
the
yeah.
African drum beats and that sort of thing, which is a super racist belief. But, he was one among a number of teachers there who taught me to really think, ask serious questions, write well in the form of arguments. And again, that created a lot of cognitive dissonance for me that was difficult to resolve, or it made it come to the surface, I guess, when I was in high school, because you're taught critical thinking skills and argumentation skills, and you're only ever supposed to use it to defend the faith. You're not ever supposed to use it to ask difficult questions. And I could not, keep that straight.
My whole brain keeps going.
So yeah, so I always
thinking.
felt different, but there were certain people that I just really liked, and in some cases I still like, that you wish that there wasn't so much between you and them sometimes, I guess. There's not really a lot that I miss from evangelicalism per se. I think if you asked me this question 10 years ago, I would have said that, maybe I missed having all the answers, but I don't anymore. I think having all the answers is stupid.
Yeah, and no one does.
Right, it's a lie. Let's not tell
Yeah,
ourselves
it's totally a
lies.
lie. Torah, what about you? What do you miss? Anything?
I will say what I used to miss a lot, and only in the past, like say 10 years, I've really been able to kind of process a lot and not miss it so much, which is the sense of family, especially around Christmas. That was a big deal, and it really went. The reason it meant so much to me was because, and I didn't realize this until I was writing my memoir, but that was the only time of year I knew for sure my parents weren't going to be fighting and I wasn't going to get beaten. On Christmas Day, the day after Christmas, which is also equally a holiday in the Amish church, is this old Christmas, second day of Christmas, and then January 6th. So it was sort of like through that period where everything was, calm, and I was probably not going to get beaten. And it was also like the sense of family, like everybody was happy. There was this sort of, this sort of good vibe that was going through the household that usually wasn't there most of the rest of the year. Got to see, my grandparents, cousins, uncles, a lot of them that we wouldn't see the rest of the year. And so, it's that's what I miss. I mean, that's the good part of the Amish, is that sense of family, this strong security. Like you knew, your fire burned or the house burned down or your leg got broken or something, somebody was there to help you. So that was another thing that I, really, it was really tough for me, knowing that I could die on the streets and my parents wouldn't care, like literally would not care. And just not, and also the holidays when I was going to school, especially going to school, and all my classmates, friends, they were going to go home, see their parents, their friends, and I was left, alone in the dorm. I had nowhere to go, and that was when I understood why people were suicidal during the holidays, and before that I didn't understand, because Christmas was the best time of the year. I got presents and didn't get beaten, and I got to see my cousins and aunts and uncles and grandparents. But yeah, so all of that, it took a long time. Like those were like really that safety net, which I call a false security blanket, because you don't have it if you aren't inside the church, if you aren't practicing the religion.
It's conditional.
Yeah, absolutely. So those were the toughest things for me, but I now can, truly do not have those feelings anymore. And that's a big, huge deal for me. And it also sort of like coincides with like my, journey away from religion. So, I totally understand if anyone who's listening is, like struggling and still, oh, I can't give up God or Jesus. I get that. It took me a long time. I looked into all the major religions and ended up with Buddhism. That was sort of the last stop on the train. And even that, ultimately, after 4 years of studying it and learning classical Tibetan language so I could read the text. So I was not, so I knew that what it actually said, it wasn't what someone was telling me was, it said. I, discovered it all rests on a major fallacy. It's all based on you must have faith, pure belief with no evidence that you can become enlightened. I'm like, well, F that. I mean, this is no different from every other religion, no different from the Amish. And I do like a lot of things about Buddhism, but I definitely, it didn't work for me. And now my last sort of remaining thing about religion, I think Chrissy was talking about this earlier, if I understood correctly, is hell. Like that still sort of nags in the background. And I never spoke about this publicly until just a few weeks ago for the first time on a podcast. This is the second time I'm talking about it publicly. But yeah, I don't know. Like I need a logical answer for it. So I work very much, if there's, if it's logical, if it's provable, there's evidence, that's the answer. And right now, I mean, I don't know. But one thing that's helped me recently was just, digging into the origins of Christianity. Well, really, Christianity is just plagiarism of the Romans and the Egyptians before that, Mithraism before that. And there's also been, interpretations or translations of, well, what does hell mean or the afterlife, which has gotten greatly distorted. And apparently, originally it was just, yeah, you're dead. You just don't get this glorious afterlife, So that's sort of like my 2 cents about hell. And
last week's show was actually on hell. So I encourage you to listen to it. It was quite interesting. I got heckled by somebody, but it was all good fun. But yeah, hell is one of those things. Sorry, my dog's having a fit. That was one of the things that was like, no, this in going into depth with that for me. That was one of the breakers. Like, if everything you say about your God is this, and then there's hell, these two don't work together. So if this is bullshit, then this has to be bullshit. I won't live in fear anymore.
Yeah. Well,
it's so controlling.
My problem is I learned the Buddhist version of it, which is, rebirth, where you have no control over how you're reborn, know what your next life is, which is different from reincarnation, which is, you're aware of your next life. And then, it gets conflated with like energy can never be destroyed, it just changes form, and then it's like, okay, well, what is consciousness versus the body, all that kind of stuff, so I also studied philosophical quantum mechanics, which didn't help like rule out possibility. But I think the most comforting thing is the mistranslation of the word hell or the concept of the afterlife. That's helping me. It's that this was just some the typical narcissist, psychopathic maniac that wants to control a whole population of people, and they're going to come up with all sorts of ways to brainwash you and make you fearful for the rest of your life. And that's, I think, where hell comes from.
Well, and hell originates with the Zoroastrianism and the Egyptians. Yeah. So it's not even Jewish or Christian or anything like that. And Islam and Christianity is the only one who thinks it's eternal. So, you go through and you have all of these different things, but, if we're all there, we're going to have a good party. It's going to be a little hot.
Torah, I just wanted to say, you reminded me that, I really miss enjoying Christmas, which I have not been able to do for a very long time.
I actually enjoy it more now because my mom had a huge issue with it. And it was always, for me, it was just the opposite. It was always stress and the lights. I enjoy it more now knowing that it's a tribute to the goddess than I ever did when it was a tribute to Jesus. I mean, when I really learned about the pagan beliefs behind everything, that's when I was like, okay, well, I can celebrate this then. This is cool.
Oh, sure.
Mom,
the pagan traditions of Yule are the only thing that sort of redeem the season for me, but it's still just a very depressing time because of memories and everything that's come between me now and the me in those memories,
Being alone on the holidays is always tough. Ilad, is there anything you miss?
Yeah, I actually miss a lot. I think that, because I was kind of rebelling against the secular world, I have, for better or for worse, a pretty healthy skepticism of things like American culture, these kinds of things that I think can often be tough for other people to land on once they leave. I don't want to speak for them, but just that for me, I kind of was already, I was already like an activist in the political realm and outside of the Jewish world as well. So when I left, I kind of knew I was leaving behind a lot of things that I was going to miss. So, for example, sense of community is extremely, extremely powerful for me. I think is in Jewish communities, or I should say in Orthodox Jewish communities, you have to live in walkable distance to the synagogue because you can't drive to it on Shabbat or on holidays. And so there's this, like, even in a suburb, I mean, I lived in New York City, but even in a suburb, even when I would go to visit my parents, for example, and I would go to the synagogue there and walk there, you would have this feeling of like being together with people, which I think is, I actually think that's a big reason that we're seeing so many problems crop up, so many such communities. And by such communities, I mean unhealthy, like kind of toxic, high control communities. I think they tend to, there's a reason I think that they're like so common in America. And I think that it's because America is so atomized. We're very alone. And, going from a city to a little bit more of a suburb. I'm in Long Beach, but it's a suburban vibe to it where I am. And I can really feel like, especially obviously with coronavirus, but I think even so, you can really feel like how alone Americans feel in general. Even when you have friends, there's kind of this, it's very unnatural, I think. And I think that, humans have kind of evolved maybe a little too far. Like, I think we need the support and the love and the connection of other people. Even like, for example, the Hasidic communities have like an ambulance service that you can use.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And there's something powerful about like having a guy come, we would have a concern about our daughter or something, and they would come over and they'd be, it's different than having like an ambulance come in. It was like, they were very sweet and it was like kind of having like a family member who happened to, come over, and it was extremely powerful. And I think that combined with like a sense of meaning and connection to something larger, I think is also kind of like an essential human need, in my opinion. And, I remember and I was missing that a lot before I joined the community. And it was kind of like a sacrifice to leave it and just know, I'm not going to have that for now, for a little while. And I remember in particular having this moment when we had moved from Israel to New York to this community in Crown Heights, and I was walking down the street, and I remember hearing these two Hasidic men talking to each other about, it was like I remember it being something about like time, eternity, I'm sure God was in there, and but really more about like these kind of deep concepts. And I was like thinking to myself at the time, like, wow, if I knew it, when I was younger, that I was going to be walking down the streets and people were going to be talking about time and eternity just casually on the street, I would have been blown away and so excited. And I think I genuinely wish like people were doing that more, and now, I feel like, speaking with with an ex-evangelical about this, and we're like, yeah, it's kind of tough because there's a lot of people that, a lot of chats can be very materialistic or not so deep. And And I feel like there was always kind of a quick, as an introvert, I love to just go deep as quickly as possible. So for me, that's pretty tough to leave behind. And, I think that's also kind of the rebuilding phase. I hope that I can rebuild that in a healthier context, because obviously I think it's possible outside of there, but I do miss it a lot. And I think it's kind of pre-built, so, for us, we moved to this community. There is another Chabad community nearby, and we kind of made a very deliberate choice to not live in any Orthodox community for now. And there's, we know that we're missing like this, moving into a place, suddenly knowing a bunch of people, suddenly having a bunch of friends, suddenly being able to go to a place on Saturday and have lunch with them and feel connected to them. And that was beautiful, and I genuinely miss that.
According to Pew Research, that is the number one thing that people do miss is community. Because as some of, like Torah was ostracized, Chrissy still has the family. I was ostracized. So, losing that, you not only lose sometimes your family, but you lose your entire community, that church and everything involved.
Yeah. That's what's so interesting is that the positive, this is the sign of something unhealthy, is that the positive gets turned into a weapon, kind of, where when you speak out, then the community ostracizing you itself is an act, I think for a lot of people traumatizing.
Totally.
Yeah. And, I said that my escape was slow and passive aggressive. And I think part of what I meant by that was that I simply slowly physically distanced myself from those communities where I could not feel comfortable being a part of them. But yeah, absolutely. There were some positive aspects of just having those communities, people there to help you out, bring you meals if somebody in your family is sick, help you load up a moving van.
But that's tough to find outside of the church or any type of religion.
But I do agree with Ilad that we surely can do it outside of religious congregations and institutions. And for me, I think I just can't go back to affiliating with any sort of religious group. I would be too afraid of the controlling aspects of those close-knit communities, where it becomes about protecting their reputation, protecting the leaders, protecting tradition, or the Bible is clear or whatever about, so you can't be queer, or you can't have women in leadership. Like, it just comes
all the rules.
With everything that they give you comes with all of these demands that are inhumane.
Yeah, I've tried to go back to a church that, even a unity church, which I really enjoyed. Their praise and worship was singing Let It Be, which I thought was super cool. But there were so many other things that came on that were red flags and the triggers for me. And from the evangelical church, I was like, yeah, I can't do this either. Can't do this either. It's just, take me to a park. Let's talk about philosophy and let's talk about all these brainy things and have lunch. And that will be my church. That's what I want. That's what I can do without the dogma, without the judgment, without all of the bullshit. That's what I'm looking for. Okay, we are at the top of the hour. So, audience, load up your questions if you have any. We are going to be heading over to the VIP to finish this conversation. But let's give some wrap-up thoughts. Chrissy, people can find her as a senior correspondent for Religion Dispatches. Do you have any final words or anywhere else that people can look for you?
You can always find me on Twitter at C_Stroup. I'm usually pretty active there. Religion Dispatches is
usually
the place that I take the occasional day off or hour off. But
there you go.
I write most frequently for Religion Dispatches these days. I also write for the new Flux Community website, which is a cool project, and a number of other places.
Do you have any final thoughts? I'll come back to you. Torah, where can people find... actually, I have one for you too. Torah has a weekly newsletter called the Amish Insider. Where can people find you and what are your final thoughts?
So you can find me at torahbontrager.com. That's where the blog is. That's the Amish Insider is the blog. And if you get on the mailing list, you get it once a week. You get something from me. It's more personalized. And you can also look at amishheritage.org, which is the nonprofit I founded to set the record straight on education. You can go to that to find more information. And final thoughts. I would say, well, I guess my final thought is back to the sense of community. If you feel like you're all alone, you're not. There's definitely those of us floating around, and I've seen more and more people come out publicly, and it's like the coming out of religion story. So that I've seen a lot in the past 3 years, just since starting the foundation. And the other thing is sort of like learning how to trust. And I think that might be linked. This is why it's so hard to build or find a new community, is because, how do you? We're usually not taught how to trust. It's like you trust in whatever the religion is, that structure, and everybody else is the devil's playground. So, that was the tough thing for me. And I would just say, look for like-minded people and don't get discouraged. And if you feel, like giving up, it took me 25 years to get to this point. I mean,
me too. Quarter century chaos is what I call it. Yeah. Ilad, final thoughts, and where, if you want to be found, they can find you.
If my social media is active, which is rare these days, but if it is, right now it happens to be active because I wanted to share this wonderful show. You can find me just my name at Ilad Neharai. I used to be known as Pap Chassid on there, but you can find me on Instagram and Twitter. And I also have a Substack, which I haven't written in a while. So truth is, right now it will be probably a little bit tough to find me, but I appreciate being on. Last thoughts. I think that I have this experience that I've been going through when I've been connecting with people. It's interesting because there are kind of like these niche X communities, which I think are very important and very powerful. But what's been interesting to me, and I've talked about this with Chrissy and with other people, is that I really strongly believe those communities were always going to feel smaller. We're, no matter what, almost by definition, will be smaller and less powerful and less impactful in such groups. So I think for a lot of reasons, it's very, they're very important for support and for other reasons. But I think there is a huge potential, I think, to our X communities kind of coming together and realizing how much we have in common. And I'm sure that's I can tell this is also already, what's happening right here and in other places. And I've seen it in so many places. I've been so inspired kind of seeing people come together, because I think, one of the big differences between a toxic community and a community of people who are leaving because they're looking for a deeper truth and a higher meaning and these kinds of things, or simply looking to be healthy, is that second group is going to be much more likely to be pluralist than the first group. We have the potential to kind of come together in a way that other groups can't, because of the toxicity of such communities and because of the us and them kind of approach. But when we break that down within ourselves, we have this opportunity to kind of do it with each other as well, and build something else that I think can be very powerful and also make a lot of change. And as someone, when I left the Orthodox community, the Hasidic community, I thought there were so few resources for people like me, because there is one support group, and they're more for people that grew up in such communities and more stringent communities and that kind of thing. But then I read this book, Leaving the Folds, which was for ex-Christians, and I discovered the ex-evangelical community, the deconstructionist community, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is like a whole world.
We're all here.
Oh, it's beautiful. It's so exciting. And I actually want a lot of my community to know about it, because I just think we don't realize how much knowledge there is out there. And I'll find out about an ex yoga group or something like that, and I'll be looking at their niche website, and I'm learning from them as well. Like there's so much knowledge out there, and imagine again also if we pooled that. So I guess that's kind of my last thought. I've been thinking about that a lot, and I really believe there's so much, it's already happening, and I believe there's so much more to go. So.
Well, I'm so glad that you guys all came here tonight, and I've got more questions. So I'm really glad that we're going to go into the VIP, because I really do. I have more questions. I knew an hour wasn't going to be long enough, and this is still running into our longest show. Chrissy, any final words? I promised I'd give you one more say.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think Ilad knows that I agree with him about that, and I'm glad that he reached out to me and I could connect him with you. Thank you for hosting this discussion.
Thank you so
much. I
much.
want to point out that Torah Bontrager is a real pioneer of bringing people together from across ex-fundamentalist and high control religious backgrounds. And, I had the honor of participating in the second Amish Heritage Foundation conference in Manhattan in November 2019, back when people still did live events, and it was it was a great experience. So there is definitely some value and meaning to be found in coming together and having dialogue about, where do we go from here with people who came from different high control religious backgrounds. I do think that's a great model that has legs, and we should try to do more of it.
Okay, well, thank you so much for being here. I am so fortunate to be able to talk with you. I'm sure that you're seeing that it was interesting, brilliant again. David, I will message you the link. I always do. Thank you so much, and I will see you guys backstage. Ilad, I'll catch up with you in a little bit. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Wasn't that great? I have so many questions still. So I am so glad that there is a VIP. If you want to jump in the VIP, go to sherrypalace.com, hit the subscribe for $3. You can get in and come on camera and talk with the panel. We've got more questions. Next week's show's a secret right now. I don't know it, but be sure to hit that like and subscribe. And thank you all so much for watching. We are headed over to the VIP, and I will see you guys next week. Thanks so much, and walk in love. Bye.